Good morning, everyone. Kevin with Flux here. Thank you for joining me today in our overview on compliance warnings and checklists. We'll be going over the configuration and use of these features. If you should have any questions at any time during this webinar, please type it in the questions section. We'll be dedicating the last few minutes or so for questions and answers, so we'll be saving all of your questions for then. If we do not get to your question in time, we'll try to curate those and answer them offline. In this compliance component webinar, we'll be answering the following questions. What are the different types of compliance components? How do I configure a compliance warning? How do I configure a compliance checklist? How do I configure a compliance document component? And how will these components function on the dashboard or in the portals? And as I said earlier, there'll be a quick Q&A after the overview. Compliance components are one of the many objects you can add to your form in Flux. There are 3 different types of compliance objects available. There's compliance warnings, compliance checklists, and compliance documents. Compliance warnings can be used to make individual fields required. A warning will appear on the form if the user tries to advance the record to the prevented state without meeting the requirements of the component. Compliance checklists require the user to check all of the boxes or items in the checklist in order to advance the record to the prevented state. Compliance documents components require the user to upload and label all required documents before advancing to the prevented state. We will be going through all of these in more detail throughout the webinar. Compliance warning components. The first type of compliance components we're going to talk about are compliance warnings for individual fields. These are especially helpful when you want to make a field required or if you want to create a reminder for the user editing a record. To begin, we're going to create a new field on your form. Then in its attribute section, choose Component under Kind and Compliance Warnings under Type. The rest of the options should then appear after you've made these 2 selections. Now, after choosing the component, you can then choose the prevented state. This part of the configuration determines which state the record will not be able to enter unless the component criteria is met. In other words, the warning will appear at the workflow state prior to this state, and the record will be kept there until the criteria set up on the visibility tab is met. You can then configure the message that appears when the warning criteria is not met. This text will go into the warning section. Now, you could add as many warnings as you wish. This is helpful when you want to add multiple criteria to one compliance component. When the record arrives at the prevented state, the warnings you've added in the admin panel will appear in red at the place in the form where you added the compliance component. It is considered a best practice to add these warnings to the top of the form so the user will know immediately why the record was prevented from moving to the next state. Okay, the next step in the configuration of the compliance component is to set the acceptance criteria for the component. This can be set in the Visibility tab. The blue conditions box is the same one you see in the Visibility tab for other fields and components. So to add a condition, simply click the green plus sign and fill in the specifications as prompted. Please note that if you leave this box empty, the component will keep all records for the theme from entering the prevented state. Even if the record has every field filled out correctly, it will still prevent it from entering the state because the criteria is not specified. Now, moving on to compliance checklist components. The setup and configuration for a compliance checklist is very similar to that of a compliance warning. One important difference, though, is the actual checkbox functionality. Instead of customizing a warning message, you'll be adding the actual label for the checkbox. Any text that you enter into the checklist items list will appear next to the checkbox and also appear in bolded red if the checkbox is not checked before proceeding to the prevented state. Also, take note that a checkbox appears in a lighter font once it's been checked. When you click the checkbox in a compliance checklist, a note modal will appear. You can leave a note associated with the checking of the box, but please remember that this process cannot be undone. Once you have checked the box and left a note, you can no longer edit the note or uncheck the box. Now, if you'd like to view the note attached to the check, click the blue I to the right of the checkbox. Moving on to compliance document components. Compliance document components are the last option and have a slightly different configuration from the other two as well. So instead of specifying a warning or a checkbox label, you'll need to specify the document that is required in order for the record to enter that prevented state. There are two multi-selects in the grant request model for this component. One for documents specific to this request called required documents, and the other is for organization documents that should be connected back to the associated organization called required organization documents. Only documents on these two lists can be marked as required by this component. Now you can add or remove documents from these lists by going to Card Documents and then choosing either the grant requests or organization's model type. Once in the correct model type for card documents, choose the Documents tab. The Grant Request Model Documents tab is shown in this screenshot here. Now you can add a document by clicking New Document Type over on the bottom of the screen there, and then filling in the specifications for the document, and then clicking Save. Each document that you add to the component via the multi-select will appear on the form with a green plus sign next to it, as you can see here. In order to upload documents, click on the green plus sign and upload the document to the modal that appears. The record will not be able to enter the prevented state until all of the documents added to the component have been uploaded. Okay, so that concludes today's webinar on compliance components, and I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any other features that I did not cover extensively, we will be hosting trainings in the future to address these features. You may also learn about any of these features by visiting our knowledge base. Okay, so let's open it up to some questions. Okay, first question, do we need to specify visibility conditions for all of the compliance components? The answer is going to be no, only the compliance warning component. The other two are dependent on the configuration that you set up in the attributes tab, so it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. Okay, next question. What states are available to me in the prevented states section? So all the states that are available in that section are going to be pulled from the given themes workflow that is configured for it. Okay, looks like that was the last question, so we'll go ahead and call it for today. You'll be able to find video recordings of past webinars, again, on our knowledge base. Today we went over what are the different types of compliance objects in Flux. How do I configure a compliance warning? How do I configure a compliance checklist? How do I configure a compliance document component? And of course, we went over how will these components function on the dashboard or the grantee portal. To learn more and access the video recording of this webinar, please visit our knowledge base at flux.io/knowledge. There you'll be able to find a list of our upcoming webinars, links to register for future webinars, and recordings of past webinars under training webinars. Or feel free to ask us at support and we'll be happy to help you. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to host you again at our next training. Have a great day.